So today I wanted to make a video about something we've heard about Eli Manning and Daniel Jones for a lot of this year. If you listen to sports talk radio, whether you're on Twitter or you just hear any news about the Giants, you always hear the saying, well, what if the Giants moved on from Eli Manning after year two? Or Giants fans tried to do the same thing to Eli Manning 15 years ago. And I kind of want to debunk this whole theory that Eli Manning and Daniel Jones are looked at in the same light. I understand the two guys have the same personality traits. They're very good teammates, very hard workers. They're both very tough. But I just want to get it out there that they're not the same player. One player is not like another player. And every time I see that comparison, it annoys me. And I don't want this to be an anti-Daniel Jones video. That's not the whole purpose of this. The purpose of it is to show you guys, or trying to tell you guys, that Eli Manning and Daniel Jones are not the same players. They were not the same prospects. And they had, some similarities their first 2 years, but ultimately were different players. So we're going to go through their stats, what they were looked like before the draft, were they highly touted prospects, and we're going to look at a bunch of other stuff that basically will tell you guys, I don't see those guys as similar players, and that comparison probably needs to stop. I know it's a good talking point. It's like, oh, well, if the Giants gave up on Eli Manning back in 2005, they would not have had the two Super Bowls. I get all that, but I just need to get my point across that these guys are not the same players. And a lot of people are on my side as well that, they're not the same players. Stop comparing the two. But you hear it a lot where it's like, well, the Giants didn't give up on Eli Manning in '05, and look what happened. Well, Daniel Jones and Eli Manning are not the same players. That's what I want to get across here. We'll jump into it. Hope you guys enjoy this video, and let's get into it. So for the first slide, we're going to start with the pre-draft process before they were even drafted to their teams, or, of course, one was traded, but before they were drafted in general. So let's start with Eli Manning. You look at the stats I have here, both guys' college stats on the top left, top right here, Daniel Jones on the right, Eli Manning on the left, of course. So for Eli Manning's draft process, highly touted. Eli Manning was, if you look at any mock draft from back then, was the number one pick in basically everyone's mock draft. He was the number one guy. You'd have a very hard time finding a mock draft where Eli Manning was not the number one guy, whether it was to the Chargers or via a trade. I know some people had a trade in there, and that's definitely what happened. So very highly touted. Eli Manning was a no-brainer first overall pick in a class that will go on to most likely have two future Hall of Fame quarterbacks as well, assuming that Ben Roethlisberger and Phillip Rivers are future Hall of Fame quarterbacks. And Larry Fitzgerald was in there as well, another future Hall of Fame wide receiver. Eli Manning was traded up for. We know that. Eli's college numbers were better in every meaningful category besides rushing, obviously. That's not an argument I'm going to win right there. But look at the left side here. And this was back when I know that Eli Manning did have more attempts by almost about 100 compared to Daniel Jones because he played more in his freshman year. But you look at every meaningful stat here. Quarterback rating, Eli Manning 137 to 122. Touchdown to interception ratio, Eli kills it there. Yards per attempt, let's see, Eli Manning beat him by basically a full yard. I mean, just about every meaningful passing stat that means something. Eli Manning was 1% better in completion percentage as well. Eli Manning was the better guy. I understand Ole Miss is a better school than Duke, when it comes to football. I completely get it. But at the same time, you have to look at their numbers and say, wow, one guy was a lot better than the other guy. Scouting report, according to Ernie Accorsi, who drafted him, there was basically something that was released about Eli Manning's scouting report, according to Ernie Accorsi. So we'll take a look here. Great arm strength and velocity he had written down. Good deep ball, good touch, feels the rush, and is the complete package at the quarterback position. So a lot of positives about Eli Manning other than his rushing. That's basically something we all know. So now on to Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, the Giants were universally laughed at for this draft pick for Daniel Jones. A lot of their own fans, myself included, were not happy about the pick. I didn't like the pick because of the low ceiling. A lot of people just thought Daniel Jones was complete garbage in general. I get it. A lot of people did not like the pick. We all know that. So Jones was taken 6th overall as compared to Eli Manning going 1st overall. I know Kyler Murray was a very, very good prospect. Not like many other guys in that class. I feel like we're definitely number one overall type guys. Like, I know Quentin Williams was definitely looked at very highly. I guess Nick Bosa is another guy looked at very highly, but still, I mean, this is a guy that went 6th overall compared to 1st overall. Majority of scouts had him as their number 3 to 5 quarterback in this class. Most scouts, I'm sure most GMs as well, had it as Kyler Murray 1, Dwayne Haskins, number 2. You might have seen people with Drew Lock before Daniel Jones. I was one of those people. I'm not a scout, of course. I'm just a meaningless YouTuber. But at the same time, it's not like Daniel Jones was an easy first or second quarterback in that class. Majority of people had him at number 3 or number 4, so that's another thing. Taking him at 6 was considered a massive reach by most that covered the draft. So when he was drafted, everyone was surprised by it. It was considered a massive reach. Scouting report on Daniel Jones, according to Draft Network, that's a website that looks at basically every prospect, just about every prospect, and gives like their scouting on each player. So his best trait was his quick game, the intermediate passing game, which we have seen Daniel Jones have success with in the most part, especially last year. Worst trait, arm accuracy beyond 10 yards. So, look, he's proven people wrong this year with the deep accuracy. His numbers, based on his deep ball, have been the best in football. But when I watch him each week, I don't look at Daniel Jones as this deadly accurate quarterback from 20 to 40 yards on. I mean, I know the numbers tell me otherwise. It's just when you watch it, it's like it doesn't really make sense. But, that's just up for your interpretation, I guess. Being under pressure is a concern for him. So that was something in college that even back then, it's definitely a problem now. When he's under pressure, a lot of bad things happen. Ceiling projects as an average starting quarterback in the NFL. Okay, that's definitely not a good thing. And that's kind of what I thought when they drafted him as well. Scheme dependent, but starter quality. So, okay, if he gets in the right scheme, he can have success. But it depends on what scheme, what surroundings he has. I think we all know that. We're seeing it now. Jones has had an up and down offensive line. When the Giants' offensive line has played well, usually Jones plays well. There was that Tampa game that was the outlier, but when the offensive line started playing better, like that Eagles game, the Bengals game when he was healthy, the Washington game, the most recent Washington game, he was playing better. So we have to put that in there as well, but definitely scheme dependent. So you can tell from the draft process and all that, Eli Manning was the number one guy. Daniel Jones was the 3rd to 5th quarterback ranked in his class. So, you can just tell based on the pre-draft process, these guys were not looked at in the same light. As I said before, I know they have similar personality traits, just not the same guy coming out of college. So now let's look at their stats in their first 2 years. I know Jones' second year is not fully complete, and Jones has 24 career starts. Eli Manning had 23 at that point, so we're basically on par, which is a positive. But as I mentioned, Jones' sophomore year is not over yet. He definitely could come back and make the last 2 starts, maybe the last game, we'll see. But anyway, so Eli Manning, we'll just compare them each category. Eli Manning, 23 games started. Daniel Jones had 24. Quarterback record, which is something that I take more importantly than other people. I know that a lot of it depends on the people around you, but I've always said this. If you're a quarterback that's throwing for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns and no turnovers, your chances of winning a game jump up exponentially as compared to a quarterback that's throwing for 150 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 turnovers. A lot of how the game outcome is reached depends on the quarterback position and how well they're playing. Like, if you're Patrick Mahomes, you're going to have a good overall record in your career. If you're Aaron Rodgers, you're going to have a good overall record in your career. Like, your team's not going to hold you back that much to the point where your quarterback record's below 500 is what I'm trying to say. So, anyway, quarterback record is 12-11 for Eli Manning, 7-17 for Daniel Jones. We know it was a lot of rough points with Daniel Jones, not a good roster around him. Pat Shurmur was there as well. Completions, 389 to 523. Daniel Jones did have almost 100 more passing attempts, but still, Eli Manning's completion percentage was 11 points lower than Daniel Jones. So that definitely favors Jones right there. Passing touchdowns, now keep in mind more attempts for Daniel Jones. Jones has 32 passing touchdowns in his first 2 years compared to Eli's 30. Interceptions, Eli had 5 more, 26 to 21. Now the fumbles is where it definitely gets bad. Eli Manning had 9 fumbles total his first 2 years. Jones has had 28 fumbles total. That's a crazy amount. Fumbles lost, Eli Manning only lost 2 in his first 2 seasons. A very good number, honestly, looking back on it. Daniel Jones lost 16 fumbles, so total turnovers, including interceptions and fumbles lost. Eli Manning had a total turnovers of 28. Daniel Jones has had 37 in 24 games. Definitely not a good number. And Eli Manning having 28 in 23 games, also not the best number, but still, 37 is astronomically high. We know that. Quarterback rating, 70.5 for Eli Manning, 83.4 for Daniel Jones. He's better there. Yards per attempt is basically on point, which is good. Rushing yards, not even close. Daniel Jones has over 500 more rushing yards than Eli Manning in his first 2 years. Now, game-winning drives. This is one where Eli Manning, I think, showed pretty early on he had the clutch gene. I think he had 1 comeback against Denver. I think there might have been another one against the Eagles. I don't know if that was year 2 or 3. And there might have been another one for Eli against the Cowboys. I was probably like 9 or 10 years old, so it's hard for me to go all the way back and think about this stuff. But yeah, Eli Manning did have himself some nice game-winning drives and comebacks and all that. He had 3 of them. Daniel Jones has had 2 of them. Now, let me think back to Daniel Jones. I guess you can consider a game-winning drive the overtime win against Washington in Week 16 last year. I would think that counts as a game-winning drive because they won the game on that drive. I mean, I think that would count. What else was there? I guess the Tampa Bay one, his first career start. So we're going way back now. This is, how many starts? 24 starts ago for Daniel Jones. But that game-winning drive against the Buccaneers was another one. So that one and the Washington one. But Daniel Jones this year has proven that he has not been very clutch. I mean, I think we all can agree on that. He's had moments to go down and win his team games. There was the Dallas Cowboy 37-34 loss where Jones got the ball in like his own 25, needed to get the ball in field goal range against a very bad Dallas defense, couldn't do it. Of course, Dallas came back and kicked the field goal. There was the game against the Rams. They were down 17-9. Jones threw the interception on the Rams' 10-yard line, basically, or 5-yard line, so that was rough. There was the Chicago Bears game where it was tougher, but they could have possibly won that game, or at least tied it. No, they could have won that game because they were down 4 points, I think, at the end there, so they could have won that game. Trying to think what other matchups there were. Oh, the Buccaneers game. How can I forget that one, where Daniel Jones played possibly his worst game in the NFL. He missed Dion Lewis, I think it was, on a 2-point conversion that should have been converted. That game should have went to overtime, as we know. So, like, Daniel Jones, from examples off the top of my head, has not been clutch this year. I think we all can agree on that. And Eli Manning proved that there were times where he was very clutch in his first 2 years. So that's something to put out there as well. But statistics-wise, and look, I know it's 2020 and 2019 as compared to 04-05, where the NFL is a lot more pass happy. It favors the quarterbacks. It favors the passing game. I get all that. So it definitely favors Daniel Jones. But just looking at the numbers, Daniel Jones has probably had a better start to his career passing the ball. But you look at the total turnovers, and Daniel Jones had 9 more. I know Jones had less interceptions, but his fumbling issue is very bad compared to a guy like Eli Manning. So I will put that in there. I think Jones has had a pretty nice start to his career statistics-wise, but there's other stuff in there that kind of leads you to believe, based on the turnovers and some other stuff, that maybe he's not a franchise quarterback. So that's number 2. Let's get to the final one, and we'll go to their player traits now. So now on to their player traits, and a lot of this is opinionated, and you could disagree with some of this. Of course, you can't disagree with stats, but this part you can disagree with. But basically, on draft night, I compared Daniel Jones to Eli Manning personality-wise and play-style-wise, Alex Smith, and a lot of people didn't like that. But personality-wise, I think Daniel Jones has a lot of Eli Manning in him. But let's get to their player traits for what I wrote down here. Eli Manning, strong arm, a lot of velocity. We know that. I think we can agree Eli Manning had a good arm. And good deep accuracy. I always remembered Eli Manning being a great deep ball passer. I mean, back in the days of Victor Cruz and even Plaxico Burress throwing a lot of great accurate deep balls to those guys. Eli Manning does feel the rush. Now, sometimes he'll just fall down, which I was not a fan of because you see a lot of quarterbacks nowadays that get out of that. But, he does have a good feel for the rush and knows where it's coming from. It was very rare for Eli Manning to just get blasted and not know where it's coming from. But we've seen at least a handful of times now in Daniel Jones' career. We just saw it Sunday with Marcus Golden, where a guy is coming from his strong side, the side that he's looking at, his right side basically, and just gets blasted and doesn't see the rush coming. So that's definitely a red flag for me. Can maneuver the pocket. Eli Manning was not fast, but there's a difference between being fast and mobile and being able to maneuver the pocket. A guy like Ben Roethlisberger can do this as well, maneuver the pocket, but not be all that quick. And I think, those guys showed that for sure. Reads defenses at a high level. Eli Manning was able to do that. Was a big game quarterback. Look at his playoff stats. I know it's not fair to compare that to Daniel Jones because he has not played in a playoff game yet. But Eli Manning was always a big game performer. I think we all know that. Had the clutch gene. He was durable. I mean, Eli Manning, thank you for his durability because we're seeing it now with Daniel Jones. Eli Manning did not miss many games, honestly. So, it was due to basically a coach benching him and basically Daniel Jones being the starter back in 2019 last year. So, no rushing ability. We know that. Throwing accurately in a collapsed pocket, and this is something Daniel Jones is pretty good at as well, is that when a guy's coming right at them, they stay in there, they make the throw. Both these guys are very tough, so I think Eli Manning was very good at that. Same with Daniel Jones. Eli Manning did throw off his back foot a good amount, which is something you don't really want, but he did do it, so I put it in there as well. Questionable decision-making. Eli Manning was definitely not afraid of interceptions. I think we get that for sure. But Eli Manning did make some questionable decisions and not always consistent. There were times where Eli Manning led the league in interceptions. There was times back in 2011 where Eli Manning basically had 5,000 yards and 30-something touchdowns. It was amazing. So there was times where Eli, even in 14-15, where Eli played out of his mind, and times where he had some of the worst seasons you'll ever see from a quarterback. Not worst seasons ever. I'll hold back on that comment. But times where he turned the ball over a lot. lot, threw a lot of bad interceptions, and just had some pretty underwhelming seasons. Now, for Daniel Jones's player traits, above average arm, I think, I could say it's average, but I'll put above average. I don't want to get yelled at here. But I think Eli Manning had the better arm than Daniel Jones. I think we can agree on that. Numbers show good deep accuracy. Now, I don't think he has the best arm when throwing deep, and I know there's been some throws in the past where he's thrown at 60, 65 yards, but we don't really see it too consistently in the NFL. But there's been times this year where he's made good throws in stride on a deep ball. We saw it to Evan Engram against Cincinnati a couple weeks ago. So, we saw it in week 1 against the Steelers with Darius Slayton. So, Daniel Jones has had his moments of throwing very accurate deep balls. So, based on the numbers, he's been very good at that. Daniel Jones doesn't maneuver the pocket very well, doesn't feel the rush. I just went over that with the Marcus Golden example from this past week. And for a guy with his type of mobility, Daniel Jones does not maneuver the pocket as well as I wish he could have. We never see Jones roll out to his left. Maybe he does sometimes. I don't see it too often. I feel like he doesn't have a good feel for the pocket, which is something that I guess you can get better at as your career goes on, but I've not been too impressed with that aspect of it so far. Sometimes can read defenses, but hasn't mastered it. We've seen instances this year, more than last year, of seeing Daniel Jones read a defense, putting a guy out. Like we saw it with Dion Lewis against the Eagles, I think, where he put him out to the left side, threw a very nice pass to him. So there's moments of Daniel Jones doing it. He just hasn't mastered it to the point where Eli Manning has, of course, but this is year 2 compared to a guy that played for 16, 17 years. Hasn't proven to be clutch. So I think it's fair to say about Daniel Jones, I think Jones has had moments, especially last year, the Tampa Bay game, of course, and I mentioned that Washington football team game last year. I know they were called the other word at that point, but he did prove in those games he was clutch. But overall, Jones has had, I listed it before, many moments of being able to go down and tie a game or win a game this year, and he's basically been 0 for 4, 0 for 5, maybe even 0 for 6 in doing so. So I have not seen the clutch gene from Daniel Jones so far this year. Durability has not been perfect. He had the ankle injury last year where he missed a couple games, whether that was because of Eli Manning wanting to start or whatever it was. But even this year, he's probably going to be on track to miss 4 or 5 games in his first 2 years, which is not bad. It's definitely not the worst thing in the world, but compared to a guy like Eli Manning's durability, it's definitely a concern. And this is a guy that had a broken collarbone in college as well. He didn't miss many games, Daniel Jones, but he did break his collarbone, so I'll put that in there as well. Very fast, has he's a good rushing threat. I think Daniel Jones, lateral quickness and being able to be elusive, he's not great at that. Doesn't make many guys miss. It's definitely tough for a quarterback to do it. It's not really your job. But straight line speed, Daniel Jones is very fast and definitely adds that rushing element that defensive coordinators have to watch out for. He stands in there and takes the hits. I think he struggled against pressure in year 2. I had it written down somewhere. It was a PFF stat. Jones under pressure in year 2. So I'll put it in here for you guys, but I'll read it out for you real quick. So under pressure, he is 61 for 132, 46% completion percentage, 5 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. So definitely not good under pressure. Jones last year was good under pressure based on the numbers, but this year has not been good at it whatsoever. Questionable decision-making, same like Eli Manning. Daniel Jones has a lot of really bad decisions. We saw it in the Tampa game. I think we saw it in this, not really the Cardinal game. It was more fumbles than bad decisions, but Jones definitely is not afraid of making bad decisions and not always consistent. We see games where Jones looks like he is the future and the franchise quarterback, where he threw for 4 touchdowns and no interceptions on multiple occasions last year. Then we see games where he looks like he is just lost and has no future. I know he was hurt, but Sunday's an example of it. Tampa Bay was an example of it. There were games early on in the year. I know it was a new playbook and the offensive line sucked, but there were times even last year, that game against the Patriots and against tougher defenses, I'll put it that way, where he struggled. So there's games where he looks inconsistent and some games where he looks really good. So I'll put that in there as well. But that'll do it for this video. I made 3 slides for you guys. You can make your own interpretation about it, but every time I see this and hear it on Sports Talk Radio and see it on Twitter, it kind of irks me in a way, because I'm like, these guys are not the same prospect. I know it's easy to make the comparison because Eli Manning was here for a long time, and Daniel Jones is supposed to be the heir apparent, the successor to Eli Manning, so it's easy to compare those guys. But when I look at them as players and look at them in the pre-draft process, I'm like, these guys aren't really that alike. I know the stats might prove that they're kind of alike, but they're not really the same player. So you guys can make your own interpretation. That's pretty much all I got to say. But hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave in the comments if you agree or disagree. Maybe throw in some stats in there as well. But hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you guys next time.